Welcome, everyone, to Session 3 of the Resist Virtual Conference. My name is Lindsay Brown with Beyond Clean. Jill Holdsworth is the Manager of Infection Prevention at Emory University Hospital, Midtown. She serves as an influential voice for building partnerships between infection preventionists and perioperative value streams, particularly in the relationships with sterile processing and the operating room. Today, Jill will discuss the importance of collaboration and forming a partnership between sterile processing, infection prevention, and the operating room. She'll explain how building strong relationships between infection preventionists and perioperative services can greatly reduce the risk for surgical site infections and adverse events. I think this is such a perfect continuation from the last session. Jill, from everyone at Beyond Clean, and I'm certain from everyone tuned into this presentation, happy International Infection Prevention Week to you. We are honored to have you as our guest speaker, and I will now turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm very happy to be here, and I am going to get started with just telling you a little bit about my facility, Emory University Hospital, Midtown. We are a 541-ish bed facility, and we are right in the heart of Atlanta, and we serve about 440 private physicians, as well as 1,200 Emory clinics, and we span about 28 specialties. And just a little bit more about our history. We have a very rich history here at Midtown, and I won't read all of this word for word for you guys, but you can see that we have a very rich history spanning all the way back to 1908, where we were a 26-bed sanitarium, and all the way up to kind of fast forwarding to 2009, where we were renamed Emory University Hospital Midtown. We've served our community for over 100 years, and we are in process right now of building a 17-story Winship Cancer Tower that will be connected to our current hospital, and we plan to open that up in 2023. And this new tower will have its own OR, its own sterile processing department, and we have been very busy planning and building and designing this new tower, and we are extremely excited to be planning and involved in that. We, of course, will continue operating out of our current hospital, but we will have this new hospital as well. And this is some pictures of our current hospital and where we're located right there on the left, if you're familiar with the Bank of America building, and then our future tower there on the bottom. That's what we project that it's going to look like there on the bottom right. Some of the other areas that are supported by our sterile processing department at Emory Midtown, we have several other procedural areas, such as interventional radiology, our cardiac cath lab, and EP lab. We have a very busy women's health and labor delivery area that has its own ORs. We have 5 ORs in that area. We have a very busy NICU. We have many outpatient clinics, respiratory therapy, and of course our nursing unit. So I like to highlight that when thinking about sterile processing and IP, we don't just have the sterile processing department in the OR. I know that all of you all are well aware of this as well, but we have to think about everything else, and I'm going to really get into that further into my presentation about all of the other areas that we have to think about, and where do we have to go and educate and look for sterile instruments and sterile storage, and where else do we need to look at. And there are so many places in our facilities and in our clinics and in our organizations that we have to make sure that we're covering. And it's not just the OR, it's not just sterile processing, and that's where we really have to work together to make sure that we're partnering to make sure we have the safest facilities possible. So we'll definitely go into that a little bit more in the presentation. So just a little bit more about our volumes here. Again, we have 35 operating rooms, and there's a little bit more about what type of operating rooms that we cover. We have 21 service lines, 200 OR staff, and 49 sterile processing staff. And then you can kind of see how our volumes have grown. Of course, we had a little bit of a reduction in FY20, as most people saw within the COVID-19 era. And we are back up and running and just as busy as ever right now. So some of the objectives that we will be going over today during this presentation, of course, we're going to discuss the importance of our collaboration for patient safety and infection control. We're going to talk about some of the risks for infection control in the perioperative setting. We're going to talk about key steps in building partnerships between SPD, IP, and the OR, and talk about some of the success stories between SPD, IP, and the OR. So the first thing that I want to mention, I love going back to standards. I am going to quote a lot of the TJC standards. I have also been blessed to be able to have gone through the DNV process. So if you are a DNV facility, I will say I'm a huge fan of DNV. I love the way that they put their emphasis on risk assessments. And if you're not sure what DNV is, it is another regulatory body that you either go by TJC or DNV, and they do come every year for your facility survey, but they really put a focus on the risk assessment and the action plan. And that's kind of where I have gotten used to focusing on assessing, doing a risk assessment, and then documenting everything that you're doing based on that risk assessment. And you'll see that as a theme. And anytime I do a talk, I always talk about doing a risk assessment and then using that to propel your action plan. And so if you are a DNV facility, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But looking at this EP for Joint Commission standards, talking about the organization and implementing the infection prevention and control activities, this is a big one for Joint Commission. But it's also very broad and very vague. So what are you doing to actually meet this standard? And if you're from a sterile processing department, you need to make sure that you're as familiar with these standards as anyone from the infection prevention department is too. And then you need to make sure what you're doing to meet these standards just as much as the IP department knows. So some of the things that we focus on under this particular EP are all your high-level disinfection activities, anything that falls under that, anything that you're doing for sterilization of your equipment. And so what does that actually mean? This means how are you following IFUs? And I know that probably some people are going to roll their eyes when I talk about IFUs because the IPs like to come around and start auditing about IFUs. And I think a lot of the sterile processing techs think that we have no idea how hard it is to follow an IFU. But I assure you that a lot of us do, and we want to help figure out how to make this easier. And one thing that I do like to talk about too is how do you get the IPs to really understand how hard it is to work in sterile processing and to follow all of these standards and all of these IFUs. And something that I feel is very important is to make sure that the IPs know what it's like to be in sterile processing. So if you have not invited your IP to come spend time with you in your department, make that step one on Monday morning when you go back into your facility, invite your IP to spend time with you. It's something that we like to do here. We like to go into our department. We like to spend time with our folks in sterile processing, and I think that's really important. If your IP has never actually spent time and understand what you do in sterile processing, then your relationship will never build from here. So we are lucky to have a great leadership group here at Emory Midtown to where they expect us to be down there. They don't expect us just to come down when we're doing an audit or we're doing rounding. They welcome us to come in. They welcome us to come and ask questions. And we never feel like we're an outsider. And that's how everybody should feel, that they can go in there at any point in time. We send our interns down there. We send our new employees down there, and we have built a great relationship that way. So if you're an IP, I would make that your first thing Monday morning that you do is go see if you can just spend time down there in sterile processing, and you will be amazed at how much your relationship can grow that way. One thing that we were not prepared for at one of our previous surveys is the surveyor asked us for a list of every single scope we have in our facility and every single thing that goes through high-level disinfection. So if you don't already have that prepared, I would get that ready as soon as possible so that you're not taken off guard when you have a surveyor come in and they ask for all of that. And this is not just scopes. This is anything that you might have that is used with Cydex or used with anything else that's a high-level disinfection. So make sure that you have that list ready so that you're not rushing around the day the surveyors come around and surprise you on the day of the survey. Are you providing competencies on a yearly basis for anything? What about your TEE probes? What about anything else that's going through a high-level disinfection process? Do you have a plan for your competencies? Do you have someone who is competent to provide those competencies? Who gives them their competency? So these are the things that your surveyors are going to hone in on, and you need to make sure that you have a plan for that for when your surveyors start to ask that. Do you have these competencies in writing? Who signs off on those? So that's something that should be part of your auditing. And for everything, not just in sterile processing, but across your whole facility, anywhere that these kind of activities are taking place. And when I say quality assurance monitoring, you need to say you're actually doing something, but you actually need to be able to talk through it. So you can't just tell a surveyor, yeah, we're doing quality monitoring, or we monitor quality. You have to actually tell them what you're doing, show them results, show them a log, show them an action plan, and what you're actually doing about it. So don't just throw the word quality monitoring or quality assurance out there and tell them that you do it, and then when they ask you more in-depth details, get caught by saying, oh, well, we can't really talk through it. So make sure you're actually doing something and can show them a nice action plan with what process you're actually using, what you're actually checking, and what you're doing about it. And I would really encourage you, if you're in sterile processing, to work with your IP. If you're an IP, work with sterile processing to figure out what your auditing process is going to be, if that's high-level disinfection, if that's for sterilization, if it's rounding, which we'll talk about more later. Work with each other to figure out how you're going to audit that and how it's going to be a collaborative effort so that you know what the frequency is going to be, how you're going to report results, and then what you're going to do about the action plan afterwards, so that, again, it's working together. It's not a punitive effort, and that you know that you're going to be providing feedback in a constructive way. So let's talk about identifying the opportunities. And so this is something I think we've done really well here at Midtown. We do regular rounding, and I will say when I first came here, we started doing rounding. We did it as a group, and I could really tell that this isn't something that has happened very often. And a lot of times with infection prevention, whenever we round really anywhere, people kind of scatter. They say, oh, IP's come in, and everybody kind of goes their different ways. They don't want IP to catch them doing something. And that's something at Emory Midtown we have worked really hard to make sure that that's not the culture here, and it absolutely is not the culture here. We have become partners on every unit we cover. We are team members on our units. We are definitely not the police of anything. We are collaborators. And I would say in sterile processing, we have worked very hard to do that as well. We work with our units. We work with the team members in sterile processing. We try to make sure they know we're listening to them. If they have an issue, we want to make sure that they know that we are there for them, and we're going to be their partners and help them. What I would really suggest, if you don't have a rounding program that you already have developed, is that you can set a regular time with the leadership or do some spot auditing. But what you really need to do is to involve team members in the rounding process. I've seen too often that IP kind of sneaks in, does the rounding, and then leaves, and they never talk to anybody. If you really want to know what's happening in the departments or in the units you're going to, you have to involve team members. So if that's designating a lead that you talk with, or if that's, seeing who you need to talk with about a certain issue, make sure you're talking to those people. And if you're the sterile processing leader, make sure that you have designated folks that you want IP to talk to, so that we can make sure the IPs are talking to the right folks. I know recently we had some increase in holds and wrappers, and our manager made sure that we talked to one of the leads in our prep and pack area that knew the most about that particular process. So making sure that we're talking to kind of a subject matter expert in those areas, it's really going to help, and it's going to form much better bonds and partnerships with our department and IP and with sterile processing. One thing that we have found that's really helpful is, if possible, it's not always possible, but if environmental services and or facilities management can come with you, that is really, really helpful. So if you can manage for facilities to come with you, then it can be really helpful. They can't always come with you. They sometimes, they can come, and then if you see a hole in the wall, or if something with environmental services is dirty and you can see it at that moment, it's really great that they're right at that time. So that can be extremely valuable if they can come with you on their rounds. It's, of course, not always possible. So if you can do that, then that would be really great. I always invite them to come with me on our rounds. It doesn't always work. Sometimes what I'll do is have environmental services just come with us and the management, on a separate round if we have something specific to talk about. So that is something that is also an option. Something that's really important is also to allow team members to ask questions or to just give them some time to discuss and talk, and engage the team members as much as possible. Communicating back to the team and back to the leadership is really important. I recently did a survey on LinkedIn about communication and engagement in rounds, and one of the biggest comments that I heard back from Sterile Processing is they never heard back from IP when they did rounds and they weren't engaged. So that's something that was really disappointing for me to hear, that we weren't, as IPs, that we weren't involving Sterile Processing enough when we came and did our rounds. And that is something that I think as IPs we need to be able to hear and to say, we hear you and we will make sure that we do a better job at including Sterile Processing to make sure that we're collaborating better. So as an IP, I want to make sure I get that message out anytime I do a talk, that we want to make sure that we are including all of you as much as possible. One thing that you want to do is make sure that you keep a running list of all the findings and actions that you've been doing together. And that's something that we had started doing here, so that when you do have a survey or you do have somebody come, you can say, look at all the things that we've done and we've completed. It's really kind of gratifying to look back and say, look at everything that we did and everything we accomplished. So I would start doing that from the beginning. Make sure that you keep a list of all of the great things that you're doing. And then you can look back and say, well, look at all the things we grayed out. And that's what we started doing. We grayed out all of the action items that we completed. And then you can look back and say that you completed all of those things. One of the other EPs for IC in the Joint Commission standards is about infection prevention and control activities when storing medical equipment, devices, and supplies. And I'd like to show some of these pictures that we found here, and this was in collaboration with our sterile processing manager, when we ventured outside of the OR and went into other areas that had sterile storage. And so what we did, my sterile processing manager and I, is we started just going through drawers, and I like to call this particular picture the toolbox drawer. And there we found this, I mean, I'm going to call this sterile storage, but this is what they were using as sterile storage. And we started going through all of these packages. And of course, as many of you can probably guess, there were holes in a lot of these packages and rips, and there were stains. And so we actually just kind of, we just kind of made a huge bag and took all of these things back to sterile processing to be re-sterilized. And unfortunately, many of them were considered non-sterile. And what we had to end up doing, and this was in one of our other procedure areas, we had to really work with them on making sure that they didn't go back to this. So we would take them back, tell them to change their storage. We found them other options. And then we would go back in a couple weeks and they were still just like this. So it's really hard when you go to places outside of the OR, and then when you go back and it's the same way. So this is where you really have to partner with IP and SPD, because if you don't stay on top of people, then it's going to go right back to the way that it was before. So this becomes really difficult. And again, this is where IP and SPD really have to partner. I feel that a lot of times we focus so much on the OR that the areas outside of the OR, they are not given as much attention, and that's that's what's really difficult. Like, we have the women's health area, we have the other procedure areas, and there's only so many SPD managers and IP team members that can go around. So we really try hard here to give everybody as much attention, but it's just really hard to do that. So again, here's some other pictures of some areas that are kind of outside of the standard areas. The picture on the right, again, this is when we cleaned out one of those drawers and got everything that we were supposed to, we had to take back to sterile processing. And then when we saw what was underneath, it was just really dirty. And again, these are the things that the surveyors are going to look for. So again, just lots and lots of education and attention to some of these areas is just really needed. This is a picture I've used for a lot of years. Sometimes we have to really focus on some areas that are outside of the OR because they, one, don't want to make a lot of trips down to the OR, or two, they just don't know how to properly take care of things. So we have to give them a little bit more time and attention to make sure that they know how to set up their carts, how to get their carts down to sterile processing in a timely fashion, and set up their carts so that things don't get broken. And that's one thing that really gets to me is when we see carts that look like the previous slide, we want to make sure that we give them good examples. So again, I've looked at cart transport with sterile processing so many times, and this, again, is a much better picture, but we've worked on transport a lot with some of these outside areas with the OR. And as an IP, I've done lots of projects where we look at how often are you bringing your carts down and how can we improve that. And I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. So when you're looking at all of these procedure areas from the outside departments, you have to ask some questions. You have to ask, how often are you bringing those carts down? And I've seen departments go from immediately to once a shift. And sometimes once a shift is going to be really a big risk because if they have a high volume of trays, that's not going to be good enough. So you really have to, again, stay on some of these areas that are outside of the OR, and SPD, IP, you guys have to work together on doing that. And just because SPD and the OR are right beside each other doesn't mean that SPD doesn't go to all of these other areas and help out. So that's something that we have been really blessed with here, is that our SPD leadership has been really helpful with us on all of the areas around this hospital, because if not, we wouldn't be successful in some of these projects here. So that is really, really important. And again, that is something that IP needs to start leading in the facilities and asking SPD for help, because they are your subject matter experts in some of these things. So you need to ask them to come with you. One of the things that we did here that was really helpful too is we asked SPD to come with us on rounds in some of those ORs that are outside of the normal OR area, like our women's health ORs. And we did rounds in those ORs with our sterile processing leaders. And they have such a different eye for things, and that can be really helpful too for all of you. So that's thinking outside of the box and getting people with a different eye and different subject matter experts way of thinking is a really great way to start forming partnerships, but also improving things and getting better patient safety. So this is a picture I've used for a long time too, and this really drove me crazy. I can remember when I saw this, it's been many years ago, where we were just kind of using all the sinks for whatever we wanted to. We were soaking in every sink, and then there's a towel in that third sink doing I don't know what. And we weren't using any kind of flow, any kind of workflow. It really kind of drove me nuts. So really, as an IP, this was right when I first started getting into sterile processing and learning about workflows and learning about what we should do. And so I remember looking at this thinking, this is just not what I learned and not what looks right. So really looking at the flow of things in SPD and making sure we understand what should each sink be used for when you do have that 3-sink setup, which I know a lot of places don't have the 3-sink setup, but when you do, what should the flow be? And if you look a little closer, you may see one other thing, which is the brush. I really hate brushes that look like this. I hate the brushes that are so gross. They're different color, like on the left one. So what is your brush policy. What do you do with your rusted brushes or your brushes that looks like what my son's toothbrush looks like half the time because of how he brushes his teeth so hard? So what do you do with your toothbrushes when they look like, not your toothbrush, I'm sorry. What do you do with your brushes in SPD when they look like that? I guess if you do have a toothbrush that looks like that, you should probably throw it away too. But have a plan for that. And do you throw them away at the end of every shift? What do you do with it? So we were thankfully able to just completely overhaul our brushes at this facility and get a better plan. But again, IPs, this is the stuff that you should be looking at when you go into your departments and making sure that you have a different eye when you're looking at things like this. Temperatures. This is one of the things I hone in on the most. So on the left, this was a previous facility, and they made a great effort. They had a way to check the temperature, but you may notice there's no probe even in the water. So a surveyor is going to pick up on this very quickly, and in fact, they did at this facility. They noticed that they didn't even have the probe sitting in the water. So easy thing for a surveyor to pick up on if you're not even going to take the temperature of the water. So try to find a way that you can automate that. There are some solutions out there, so that would be a great, easy fix for you to do. Transport containers really kind of drive me crazy, especially when you're using these Tupperware containers. You can see on some of these, we've obviously had a lot of adhesive on these, and we've even written on them with Sharpies at one point. So one of my biggest pet peeves is when we haven't standardized things like this. So this was a huge project for us here a couple years ago where we kind of outlawed the Tupperware containers, and we moved to standardizing all of our transport containers and our pre-treatment of all of these instruments. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail with this. And then part two of this project was, have we pre-treated our instruments? Are they closed? So kind of looking at the whole picture with this project. And so starting off with this project, we gathered our team together, and again, knowing that this particular project was not going to be just the OR, it was also going to be the clinical units. It was going to be the non-OR procedure areas. So looking at who do we need on this team? We knew we needed nursing, we needed the OR, we needed IT, and we needed sterile processing leadership. And then we knew we needed to assess all of the areas of the hospital, and this was not just the OR. So how are we going to do that? We knew the OR would be a little bit easier, but how are we going to figure out in all of the clinical areas, what did they have there? What did they have that needed to come to sterile processing? And did they even know where those things were? And then after we figured that out, we needed to figure out if they knew how to pre-clean, if they ever did any pre-cleaning, and how do they actually transport their things now. We did have some incidences where they kind of stuck a scope in a biohazard bag, and they were thrown away because what do you do with something that arrives in a biohazard bag? You throw it away in the biohazard trash. So we knew we needed to do something because we couldn't have that happening. And then after we found out all of that information, we had to tell them what to do. Standardize the product, standardize the process, and then figure out how we needed to educate. Then after that, we knew we were going to audit and audit and audit some more. And so we had to figure out how we were going to do that because we had half the process automated, and then we had half the process that was going to be manual. So this is just a snippet of the process, how we assessed all of the clinical areas. So everywhere outside of the OR, it was a very manual process. It took a whole lot of time. And part of this was done by IP. And we went to every clinical unit and non-OR procedural area. We did a lot of searching in some of these clean areas. We found a lot of expired supplies doing that. But we figured out what kind of scopes did they have, what kind of instruments did they have. A lot of these areas didn't even know they had these instruments. We figured out if they even knew what pre-cleaning was. If they did they do anything? Was it consistent? Did they spray? Did they use a kind of wipe? And then did they use any kind of container? Did they use a cart? Some people had carts. Some of the procedure areas, the non-OR procedure areas, And some of them had containers, some of them didn't. So it was a big project, and there was a lot of inconsistencies. Most people had no biohazard stickers. Most of them didn't have what they needed. So it was a lot of information, and we knew we had a lot to do. Then what we had to do was figure out what kind of container they needed and then how many. So the containers needed and how many, we left that up to the sterile processing manager, and then we just fed that information back to the areas. Instead of letting the areas figure that out themselves, sterile processing knew what these instruments were, what size container they needed to have that fit in them, and then we ordered a couple extra because we knew that if they were sending something to sterile processing, then they needed an extra bin so that they could always have one on the unit. And then we kept track of when their bins were received. And then we also kept track of when we completed in-services. So the in-services were completed by sterile processing and the IP. And what we have found out is we have to continually in-service these areas, especially those nursing units that don't do this at a high frequency. And that's been really difficult because regulatory agencies are going to expect these clinical units to continue to know what to do if they were to have a soiled instrument on their unit. That is really difficult because some of these clinical units may never see a soiled instrument just because of the type of unit that they are on. So this is a big ask of IPs because we have it on our monthly rounds that we do for IP to ask, what would you do if you had a soiled instrument? Where do you keep your biohazard bin? Where would you get your spray if you were to use it? So basically what we have told them, if you don't keep it stocked on your unit, then you need to know where to get it. And this is kind of exhausting for us because a lot of these units don't remember. We've just actually done a re-campaign of this whole process to make sure that they have their signage up, that they know where to get it. But with staff turnover, it is just really an exhausting process, and it's very, very difficult to keep up with. The procedure area is much easier, but the nursing units, it's been really hard. And we know surveyors are asking this. We know that people have been cited for it. So it still is very important, but it isn't very easy. So this is just an example of one of the signs that we have made just to try and make it very easy, a 1, 2, 3 step. You do this, you spray, then you put it in your biohazard bin. One of the challenges is people lose their bins or they bring them to sterile processing and they never come get them. So there's always challenges, but we just continually try to educate on these types of things. This is a snippet of the manual spreadsheet that we have had to use. Unfortunately, a lot of this has been manual. For the OR, we thankfully had they were called liaisons, OR liaisons, who were able to keep track in an electronic software on their iPads. But for everywhere else in the hospital, we did not have that role that was able to do that. So we had to keep track of a lot of this when they checked in the trays or whatever they were bringing at the decontam area. So thankfully, our decontam staff, they were willing to do this, but they did have to keep it on a spreadsheet. So the challenges with this were, as people rotated in and out through decontam, we had to continually educate on what the process was, and it's manual. So there's always going to be challenges with this, but they were great about it. We asked them to do it, told them that this is so we can help you guys. We want these instruments to come the way that they should so that it's easier for you guys to do your part in decontam. So we want them to come open and sprayed and in the right transport containers. So they saw it as a trade-off. We're going to keep track of this so that we can better the process, moving forward. So they were really great partners, and we knew it was a big ask, but we made sure that we continually thanked them and told them how it was going to help them. And again, managing the process, there were so many issues that in the beginning, but we were able to just keep working through them as a team and just continually reinforcing with our team members across the facility. We had clean stickers that were put on the bins after they went through the washer. But again, with that process, the units that were using them had to take the clean sticker off as soon as they were using them as a soiled bin. So sometimes that clean sticker wasn't taken off. So of course that was always an issue. Again, the manual auditing sometimes is an issue. And then the continually auditing and servicing. So this is where the IP department we had to really rely on them to continue auditing and then feeding back some of that to sterile processing and to all of the units that we were having trouble with. So again, this is a huge, huge team effort. And to do a project like this, it takes so much communication. It takes so much teamwork. And so I encourage you, if you're going to do something like this, to first pull your team together, figure out how you're going to do this, how you're going to communicate. It's a really, really important project to do and to make sure that you're doing it right in your facility. It is a lot of work, but it's really rewarding when you see it actually happening. But you do have to work together. This is just some of our data at the end. This was our OR data, and just you can see how over time we improved a huge amount. This was OR proper, and then this is the non-OR areas with our compliance with all three elements. So the way that we kept this was if you had the right transport bin, you did your you got your gross soil off, and you had your pre-cleaning, pre-spraying completed. So we started out below 20% compliant with all three elements, and then we were able to get it up to 100%, which was really pretty amazing. We felt like we were pretty compliant by the end. Of course, it kind of goes up and down over time, but we did it, and we still keep track of it now. And of course, it still goes up and down a little bit, but we do hover in the 90 to 100 ranges. So our next steps, what we would like to do is to develop some kind of standardized method for data collection that's electronic, but we still have not figured that out yet. A routine education is something the IP department is kind of working on. Again, it's just really difficult to continue to educate all of these areas, especially with COVID. It has been really difficult to throw anything new at the nurses or just continuing to educate on so many different things. The clinical staff is really overloaded right now, so we're continuing to educate on so many different things that it's hard for them to retain anything for a long period of time. So we're just doing the best that we can with the clinical staff. We know that they're all tired and exhausted with COVID, so just trying to support them as best as we can with all of these things that we want them to remember. It's just some challenges with COVID. I wanted to touch a little bit on reprocessing single-use devices. I know this comes up as a hot topic a lot of times when we're talking about COVID, and this has been something that's come up with a lot of things during this crisis. And when talking about single-use items, I won't talk about anything specific, but one thing you have to consider is you can't just decide to start reprocessing a single-use item. You do have to stop and consider, are we at a crisis capacity? Have you talked to the people that you need to discuss this with? And I've written who you really should talk about before you start to think about this. If there isn't an FDA EUA, then you really need to discuss with some leaders in your facility, risk management, legal, infection prevention. Everybody needs to come together and say, what are we going to do about this? And if there is an FDA EUA in process or it's already approved, that's when you can come together and say, okay, how are we going to do this? If there isn't, I would say the first thing to do is to contact the company or manufacturer. And we've done that a few times with some things that we feel like could be reprocessed. The first thing we've done is to contact the company. And then if not, then again, just you need to talk with legal, your own risk management, and see what your options are. And of course, with your purchasing department to see what your actual supplies are, what your numbers are, and what your current status is, what your burn rate is, what's the outlook for how long you think you're actually going to have with a certain amount of supplies. But again, this is a team. This isn't just the IP saying, oh, I wonder how much we're going to do, or a sterile processing doing it alone. Everybody has to come together to figure out what is the best thing to do for the patient, for the hospital, for your healthcare system. Everybody has to come together to do this together, and everybody has to agree that it's the right thing to do, because these are definitely not normal times. So we are doing things that maybe we wouldn't normally do if we weren't in a pandemic, but we all have to feel comfortable doing what we're doing. We all have to make sure that we're doing the right thing also. And of course, I do have to mention N95 reprocessing, because I know we're all doing it. I am so proud of our facility here for what we've accomplished. We have really undertaken the N95 reprocessing and sterile processing really well here. We've worked so great as a team between the OR, IP, and SPD. Our SPD leaders have just been rock stars with this. We have gone through so many iterations of our process and reworked it and tweaked it to make it work for our facility. And we just have really done an awesome job here. But when considering how you're going to do this, there's just so many things that I've written here that you can consider in the beginning and how you're going to do this. And I promise you, if you start off with considering these things, you're probably going to change it 10 different times to figure out how it's going to work for you. Right now, what we've done to figure out how to make these things a little bit better, a little bit easier, we do huddles on Friday with our OR, our project manager, IP, and our sterile processing leaders to figure out how the week went. What units did you have trouble with this week? Who hasn't picked up their bins from sterile processing yet? I just got back from sterile processing before I came over to start the webinar to see what bins were still left over there so we can contact those leaders to get them. Our sterile processing group thankfully goes to the units to pick up the bins of masks, but the units are responsible to come get the clean masks. So it's a give and take for the facility so that we're all working together. But it's been a great journey for this facility to see not only the facility gets to see sterile processing out on the units and to really appreciate what they do, but we've also all worked really hard together to keep our team members safe and to conserve PPE and be great stewards of our PPE. One of the biggest challenges has been the mask with the soil and makeup and how do we communicate back to people when they send a mask down that really doesn't meet the standard. And the mask in the picture is actually one of the better ones that comes down. So we've not only had to educate people on what else can they do to moisturize their face or to protect their face, because that's one of the things that we were kind of seeing was they said, oh, well, the mask irritates my face, so I'm going to put makeup on to provide a barrier. So our healthcare system put out some education about how to keep your mask from irritating your face. We had multiple challenges with pickup and drop-off, so we've changed that process several times, but I think what we have now is really working, and we were able to take kind of I won't call it downtime, but a pause where the numbers were a little lower to really tweak our process to where we think that we've got it now to where it's really a good process so that if the numbers start to go up again, then it's really going to be a process that's good. It's going to work. And we have been able to work with sterile processing leadership to where it's not going to interrupt the OR workflow with our surgical volumes. And so it's been a really great collaboration. And I would recommend if you're going to define a frequency that you're going to ask the clinical teams to send their masks, or you're going to define some sort of goal, to do that early. If not, that's okay too. We initially recommended once a week reprocessing. Now we're just kind of telling them as much as you want to send it, but make sure that they know how often that mask can be reprocessed depending on what method that we're using in sterile processing. One of the biggest things during COVID has been the uncertainty and fear, and what we have been saying to all of our units across the facility is this is where IP can really help you. If you have people that really just feel uncertain, really are fearful, invite IP down, let them come talk to you in person. What we found in the beginning more so of COVID is they had a lot of emails, a lot of information coming in email, but there was no person that they were talking to. So we have gone and talked to so many departments in person, and just having someone's face there in person to talk to really, really helps people. Even if it's over Zoom, just to see someone's face there to talk to instead of just reading an email, it really helps, because just seeing an email of all of this information just made people feel even more uncertain. So just having someone to contact really just helps people out a lot, and just to see someone's face. And I always, again, recommend that IP come and shadow and work with the team if IP's never been to SPD and shadowed anybody, or if you're the IP and you haven't been down to sterile processing. And I don't mean go down there just to audit or walk around. I mean really go down there and put on the PPE and actually do the work, do something at the sink. The one thing that I can speak for when I go to facilities meetings, and that's me and one of my team members there, is I tell them they need to go and put the PP on and decontam, and then see how much they sweat when they pull off that PPE. And I actually told one of our HVAC engineers recently, and I wanted him to go do that because my scrubs were a different color when I took all the PPE off, and we needed to do something about the temperature and humidity and decontam because I have never been so sweaty in my life. And if you don't actually go in there and do all of that, you can't say from personal experience how you really have to do something about that. And I think everybody needs to have that experience. The other thing with COVID is the PPE shortages and how you continue to educate about the differences in what we're getting in. And I love the picture down at the bottom left because at any given time, you can have so many different types of gowns, so many different kinds of booties, different types of masks. So this is where IP really needs to step into and help evaluate new types of PPE or equipment or mask or whatever you have going on in your department. Pull in IP so that we can all work together to make sure everybody feels comfortable with what you've got or what you need to evaluate something that's coming in or something new of, so that we can all work together and all feel comfortable with what we have that's coming in or what's new. It's very uncertain times right now what we are going to have stock in and what we aren't, just because of shortages and manufacturers. So we have to work together on this, so especially so people feel good and comfortable about what they're doing. And I like to end with a couple things. This is one of my favorite quotes from our vice president here of our procedural areas for Emory Midtown. I feel we've leveraged the professional relationship and partnership with IPOR and SPD by the following: open and honest communication and feedback, creating a safe environment for all parties, valuing individual knowledge base, understanding roles, and developing relationships via meetings, going to the GIMBA, which is a lean term if you're not familiar with it, and trial error, the ability strategically planning directions for the department. And I feel like that is something that we've done really well here. And going to the GIMBA, if you're not familiar with that, is going to where the work is done. And that's a lean term. So going to where the work is done is so important. And for IPs, that's really directed towards us, that we cannot improve our relationship with sterile processing if we don't go to where the work is done. If we don't go spend time in sterile processing with the people who are doing the work, then we can never improve that relationship and really truly understand what they're going through and what they are doing. And I like to preach to people that if you're an IP and you can absolutely get certified in sterile processing, it may take you 2 to 3 years to get the 400 hours that's required, but it is absolutely possible. It took me about 2 years to get my hours in, but you start keeping track now, and it is absolutely possible. And it was one of the harder things that I have done. It was harder than the CIC for me, for the IPs, but it is really rewarding to be able to do that and to work alongside the sterile processing technicians and learning from them and then becoming certified along with them. So I really encourage you to start doing that and keeping track of your hours and learning from each other. And I also like to give some suggested reading that I have collected from some of my leaders. I like to just kind of end with this. And of course, I had to add Hank's book, The Front Line, which I just got my copy myself. And I was surprised. I didn't realize you actually get some CEUs from that. So if you're like me and your certification hours are coming up, then you actually get some CEUs from that too. So these are my own personal suggested readings that I think would be good for all of you. And with that, I would like to close, and I just want to say thank you for everything that you guys do. I know this has been a really tough year, whether you're still processing, IP, OR. I know that we've all gone through a lot this year. Hopefully we never have to go through a year like this again, but hang in there, everybody. I know you're doing great work, and I really appreciate all the collaboration that all of you guys do with each other. And you guys are just doing an awesome job, so keep it up. And thank you guys so much.
All right, Jill, thank you so much for that incredible presentation, and especially as this conference is geared toward infection preventionists, it's so valuable to hear directly from one. So thank you so much. We did have a lot of great questions come through, so without further ado, let's go on and get started. All right. The first one says, it's great that you are CRCST. How were you able to get enough hours in all the different areas to be eligible for the certification?
That's a great question, since I just talked about that a little bit. Yeah, so it's a great question, because it was really difficult. And as IPs, that's not our primary job to be in sterile processing, and 400 hours is a lot. So when one of my previous jobs, I was put in charge of a project in sterile processing that was an improvement project when we unfortunately lost our OR director and our SPD director at the same time. And my CEO at the time asked me if I was comfortable leading this project, because he knew that I had knowledge in SPD. And at the time I had some knowledge, but not a huge amount of knowledge. And we laugh about this now, but I remember sitting in his office scared to death. And of course I said, sure, I can do this. But in my mind, I was thinking, there is absolutely no way I can do this. And because I got put in charge of that project, I was spending a lot of time in SPD doing a lot of hands-on things, because I was in charge of this huge project to improve a lot of things in SPD when we had we were void of a lot of leadership in the area at the time. So I have a lot of people to thank for that, who helped me a lot. And like I said, you have to spend a lot of time in the area. And it did take me about 2 years to get all of the hours that I needed to have documented. But if you start documenting now, and this is what I tell my team here as well, you start documenting now, and in a couple years, you will have what you need, but you have to make sure that you're documenting in the different areas, so that you're not just kind of documenting all over the place. But it is worth it once you are able to get it. And I'm so proud of those letters after my name, because I feel like it was one of the harder things to do, because it took such a long time to get it. But yeah, it is difficult for IPs when that isn't your primary role. But I would encourage you guys to start documenting in all the different areas. And you can look on the ISHM website and pull the requirements to see all the different areas if you're not sure what those are. And just start putting your hours down for all those different areas, and make a plan. What I've done with one of my team members is to make a plan for each month where you're going to go observe and what you're going to do, so that you can work towards that too.
Wonderful. Well, and congratulations to you on obtaining that certification. Yes. How are you monitoring the off-gassing of H2O2 when we're processing your N95s, or are you steam sterilizing them? If steam sterilizing them, how are you monitoring for integrity of the masks?
Yeah, so our primary method is steam sterilization. When that EUA came out, we switched primarily to the steam sterilization for the types of masks that are able to go into the steam sterilization. So what we have started doing is really educating the teams when they take their mask out. The IP team does a really great job about this. So we really are pushing to make sure that they understand how to do the seal checks. So whereas we're not refit testing everybody, of course, after they do the steam sterilization. But what we have really pushed is to make sure that every time you put an N95 back on, you really should be you need to do that field check again. So whereas we're not doing a full evaluation of the integrity of that N95, but you have to do that seal check. And if that seal check fails, no matter if you put it through the reprocessing or not, then you shouldn't be using that mask in the first place. And we've had a lot of struggles with that, especially when people just take off their masks on and off, all day. So that's something that we're continually reinforcing and re-educating about. How do you do a seal check? And especially when somebody maybe wears a mask that they shouldn't be wearing, but no one should ever pass up on a seal check, and that's for a reprocessed mask or not.
Okay. This next question says, what are your feelings on third-party reprocessing companies and single-use products? Not a loaded question at all.
I don't know if that question is asking if we're reprocessing single-use products, or I'm not sure if those two questions go together.
Yeah, it just says, what are your feelings on both of those things?
Okay. We don't currently use third-party reprocessing to my knowledge, but I don't know that I have strong feelings either way about third-party reprocessing. I know that in the past I've looked into them, and I think they can be really beneficial. They can offload some of the work from sterile processing department. So I don't have strong feelings one way or the other about them personally. I think that you have to do your due diligence no matter what with looking into, transportation and the actual facilities that they're going to. I've actually looked at some of them myself, and some of them are really wonderful. But I think that you really have to look at what facilities those are going to, how they're coming back to you. I personally don't like to trust things that I can't go look at myself or monitor on a regular basis. So I would probably want something that it was nearby that I could go look at all the time and just make sure that, I could audit a lot, just like I could my own sterile processing department, just because that's who IPs are. We like to go look at stuff and audit things. So I think it would make IPs feel a little uncomfortable if they couldn't go just check it out all the time. I would also be concerned about turnaround time. I know somewhere as busy as our facility, sometimes we need a very quick turnaround time because of just how many cases we do and how many things that we need very quickly. So it's not that I have strong feelings one way or the other. It's just I would have a lot of questions, and I think that anybody would have a lot of questions depending on what it is you're looking at. As far as single-use items, I'm not sure exactly how to answer that unless we're talking about reprocessing single-use items, and that's a super loaded question. And that kind of goes back to my earlier slide about that really is a discussion between a huge team of people that would have to include legal and risk management. And if there's not something like an FDA EUA already in place, then that, at least at my facility, that's something that includes a huge team of people, because that becomes a legal consideration at that point, and you involve a huge team of people just to make sure that you're doing the right thing, and that if legal is on board, then that's something that you have to make sure everybody is okay with. That's not something that IP and SPD or the OR can make independently. That has to be something that your senior leadership and a lot of other people have to be on board with your decision.
Okay. This next question says, who manages the N95 processing program in your facility?
Yeah, so the N95 processing, it's something that we kind of co-manage. So my SPD leadership, the IP team, and OR leadership kind of all co-own that process. And we also have a project manager with us. So it's something that I don't think that any one of us can manage on our own. And I think that we're kind of blessed here that all of us work so well together, and we all kind of own a piece of it. We also have somebody that the project manager manages our data for us on that. And we have an electronic instrument management system that we have all of our units in, that we're able to pull our volumes out of how many masks for each unit we're processing. And so our project manager kind of does that for us. But if all of us weren't working together, I don't think it would be successful. So there isn't one person that's managing that whole process. All of us are managing it together and working as a team. And I think if we weren't doing it that way, there's no way that we would be successful. And we have some really strong nursing partners that kind of pop in and out of the process. And again, if we weren't doing it that way, we would never be successful at it. And we have the backing of our senior leadership as well. And they've put a really strong emphasis on it and making sure that it is going well. And that has made it a really smooth process here.
Wonderful. This next question says, how do you monitor and manage holes in wrappers in your sterile processing department?
Yeah, that's a good one. Our leaders in our sterile processing department send us a report every month, and we have seen some trends in certain service lines, and that is something that we're currently actively working on. And we are trying to make sure that we have very strict vendor compliance as well as education with our vendors so that we can make sure that they're complying with all of our rules, make sure that the weights are all compliant, and that's kind of where we're starting with our holds. We're looking at how they're stacked, how they're stored, and now that we kind of see where our trends are, we're also starting to look at that through our Infection Prevention Committee. So again, that's also kind of working as a partnership with IP and Sterile Processing and OR. And you can kind of see a trend here. We work together on a lot of things. And again, I think that's why we're so successful at some of these things is if we're not working together, then there's no way that we would be successful at some of these things.
I think that is the perfect ending of this presentation, that statement right there. We have run out of time for this session. There are a couple of additional questions that came through, and I will make sure that those get sent over to Jill so she can address those via email. If you have additional questions, feel free to enter them into the Q&A tool on your screen, and Jill will be able to answer those directly. Jill, thank you so much for an outstanding contribution to this important conversation on building partnerships between infection prevention, OR, and SPD. Hugely, hugely important, and happy Infection Prevention Week to you again. To everyone tuned in, you're welcome. You're welcome. To everyone tuned in, just a quick reminder that there will be a 15-minute break before the next session. We are so glad that you're here, and we look forward to seeing you in about 15 minutes.